Lego has a squeaky clean reputation as a family-friendly toy company, but over the decades they've had to pull dozens of sets from shelves, issue apologies, and even face lawsuits because certain products crossed lines they didn't anticipate crossing. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. The Jabba's Palace controversy. Back in 2013, the Turkish community raised serious concerns about Lego's Star Wars Jabba's Palace set because the architecture bore striking resemblance to Istanbul's Hagia Sophia Mosque, one of the most sacred buildings in Islamic history. The set featured Middle Eastern-inspired design elements, including domed towers and ornate archways, that critics argued stereotyped Islamic culture by associating it with a villain's lair in a science fiction universe. Lego eventually discontinued the set amid the backlash, though the company never explicitly admitted the architectural similarities were intentional, and collectors now pay premium prices for sealed boxes of this controversial palace. The set also featured Boba Fett and other fan-favorite characters, but the cultural insensitivity allegations overshadowed what should have been a celebration of one of Star Wars' most iconic locations. Turkish politicians even got involved, with some calling for a complete boycott of Lego products in their country until the company issued a formal apology for what they perceived as mockery of their religious heritage. The original Bionicle marketing mishap. Lego's Bionicle line became one of their most successful original properties, but the initial wave in 2001 sparked unexpected controversy in Maori communities across New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. The company had borrowed dozens of words directly from the Maori language for character names, locations, and concepts without seeking permission or offering any recognition to the indigenous culture they were pulling from. Words like Tohunga, which refers to Maori priests and experts, were used for action figure characters engaged in combat scenarios, which Maori leaders found deeply offensive and disrespectful to their spiritual traditions. Lego scrambled to rename multiple characters and sets, with Tohunga becoming Matoran in all future releases, and they implemented new cultural consultation policies for all future product lines. The company paid an undisclosed settlement to Maori representatives and agreed to work with cultural advisors, but the damage to their reputation in oceanic markets took years to repair. Even today, original Bionicle sets with the Maori names are considered somewhat taboo in collector circles, with some enthusiasts refusing to buy or sell them out of respect for the affected communities. The concentration camp train set Dedical. In 2002, a Polish artist named Zbigniew Libera created an art installation using genuine Lego bricks that depicted scenes from concentration camps, complete with guard towers, barbed wire, and prisoner minifigures in striped uniforms. Lego was horrified when images of the installation went viral, as the company had actually donated the bricks to Libera under the impression he was creating educational children's displays for museums. The company immediately issued statements distancing themselves from the artwork, emphasizing that they never would have provided materials had they known the intended use, and they updated their donation policies to include explicit restrictions on how their products could be used in art projects. The installation appeared in galleries across Europe despite Lego's objections, sparking intense debate about artistic freedom versus corporate image control, and whether Lego had any right to dictate how their products were used once sold or donated. Jewish organizations were divided on the matter, with some arguing the installation trivialized the Holocaust, while others defended it as a powerful commentary on how society commodifies and sanitizes historical atrocities. Lego ultimately couldn't prevent the exhibition from touring, but they successfully lobbied several museums to refuse hosting it, and the controversy led to stricter licensing agreements for all Lego products used in public displays. The Cafe Corner adult figures recall. The Lego Creator Expert Cafe Corner set from 2007 seems innocent enough at first glance, being part of the modular building series beloved by adult collectors for its architectural detail and realistic urban design. However, eagle-eyed customers noticed that the set included minifigures positioned in the upper windows of the building in ways that strongly suggested adult entertainment establishments rather than a simple cafe, with some figures in states of undress and suggestive poses. Parent groups erupted when children asked uncomfortable questions about why the Lego people in the windows weren't fully clothed, and conservative family organizations threatened boycotts if LEGO didn't address what they called hidden adult content in a children's toy. LEGO quietly revised the instructions in later production runs to show the figures positioned differently and fully clothed, though they never issued a formal recall of the original sets. The controversy was particularly embarrassing because the set was marketed toward adult collectors with its $150 price point, yet LEGO's brand guidelines explicitly forbid any content that could be construed as sexual in nature. Original unmodified cafe corner sets with the suggestive window arrangements now sell for double their retail price among collectors who appreciate the unintentional adult humor. The Aquazone Crystal Skull Satanic Panic. During the mid-90s, when LEGO released their Aquazone underwater exploration theme, certain sets included transparent neon skulls as decorative elements meant to represent ancient underwater civilizations or pirate treasure markers. Religious groups in the United States, still riding the wave of the satanic panic that had gripped suburban America, claimed these skull elements were occult symbols designed to indoctrinate children into dark spiritual practices. Several Christian bookstores and toy retailers refused to stock Aquazone sets, and some churches organized LEGO burning events where concerned parents destroyed their children's collections in parking lot bonfires. LEGO tried to explain that skulls were simply a universal symbol for danger or ancient history, with no religious connotation intended, but the damage was done in certain conservative markets. The company eventually phased out prominent skull imagery in underwater themes, though they never explicitly connected this design decision to the religious backlash. This controversy seems absurd in hindsight, given that LEGO now regularly includes skulls in their Pirates, Castle, and Ninjago lines without any pushback. But in the cultural climate of the 90s, it represented a genuine threat to sales in the American Bible Belt. Some of the Aquazone sets affected by the controversy were discontinued earlier than planned, making them unexpectedly rare in today's collector market. The Fabuland racial stereotype accusations. LEGO's Fabuland line from the 1980s featured anthropomorphic animal characters living in a charming village setting, marketed primarily to preschoolers as a gentler alternative to the standard brick-building sets. Several characters in the line faced accusations of racial stereotyping, particularly a monkey character named Mike, who wore clothing and engaged in behaviors that critics argued echoed harmful caricatures of black people from early 20th century media. A cat character named Clive was criticized for similar reasons, with his design and personality traits allegedly reinforcing ethnic stereotypes common in European children's media of that era. LEGO maintained these were innocent animal characters with no human racial coding intended, but they quietly discontinued the most controversial characters midway through the line's run. The company has never publicly acknowledged these accusations in their official history of Fabuland, and the sets remain popular among nostalgic collectors who remember them fondly from childhood without recognizing the problematic elements. Modern collectors and LEGO historians have written extensively about the unintentional racism in Fabuland designs, with some arguing the controversy is overblown, while others insist it reflects the casual prejudices that permeated children's media in the 1980s. The entire Fabuland line was discontinued in 1990, with LEGO citing changing market preferences, though some industry analysts believe the growing awareness of racial sensitivity in toys played a role in the decision. The Wild West Fort Legoredo Native American controversy. LEGO's Western theme in the 90s included Fort Legoredo and several sets depicting conflicts between cowboys and Native Americans, complete with teepees, war bonnets, and other cultural symbols. Indigenous rights organizations criticized the sets for perpetuating harmful cowboys and Indians narratives that portrayed native peoples as savage antagonists rather than as victims of colonization and genocide. The sets included Native American minifigures with red skin tone, which was seen as particularly offensive given the history of racial slurs targeting indigenous peoples. LEGO defended the sets as historical play scenarios that reflected the Western genre popular in movies and books, but they eventually discontinued the Western theme entirely in 2002 after years of persistent criticism. The company hasn't released a Western-themed set since, making this one of the few LEGO themes apparently retired due to cultural sensitivity concerns rather than market performance. Modern LEGO historians point to the Fort Legoredo controversy as a turning point in how the company approached cultural representation, leading to the diversity and consultation policies they employ today. Some collectors argue that the sets are valuable historical artifacts that reflect both the Wild West mythology and the casual racism of 1990s toy design, while others believe they should be removed from collections entirely. The Scala jewelry line gender controversy. In the early 90s, LEGO launched Scala, a line specifically marketed to girls that focused on jewelry making and fashion rather than traditional building, featuring pastel colors and mini dolls instead of standard minifigures. Feminist critics and even some LEGO fans attacked the line as regressive gender stereotyping that reinforced the idea that girls weren't interested in regular building toys and needed a dumbed-down version focused on appearance and accessories. The criticism intensified when marketing materials for Scala explicitly stated it was designed for girls who found regular LEGO too complicated or uninteresting, essentially admitting the company believed female children had different and lesser building capabilities than boys. LEGO discontinued Scala in 1998 after poor sales, though they learned little from the failure, and later repeated similar mistakes with the Belleville and early Friends lines. The entire controversy has been cited in business school case studies as an example of how assuming gender preferences, rather than allowing children to choose based on individual interest, can backfire commercially. Internal LEGO documents that leaked years later revealed that some employees had warned against the Scala approach, arguing it contradicted the company's core message that building toys were universal, but they were overruled by executives chasing the untapped girls market. Modern LEGO sets are marketed more neutrally, though the company still faces ongoing criticism about the pink aisle problem and how their products are merchandised in toy stores. The Rock Raiders underground environmentalism backlash. LEGO's Rock Raiders theme from 1990 featured miners extracting crystals and resources from underground caverns, complete with massive drilling vehicles and explosive equipment for breaking through rock formations. Environmental groups criticized the theme for glorifying extractive industries and teaching children that mining and resource exploitation were exciting adventures rather than environmentally destructive activities. The sets came out during a period of heightened awareness about mountaintop removal mining and its devastating ecological impacts, making the timing particularly poor for a toy line celebrating similar activities. LEGO responded that Rock Raiders was set on an alien planet, not Earth, and was pure science fiction rather than commentary on real-world mining practices. Critics pointed out that children wouldn't make that distinction and would simply absorb the message that digging up the ground for resources was heroic and fun. The theme was discontinued after just 2 years, despite strong sales, with LEGO citing the complexity of the sets rather than the environmental backlash, though internal documents suggested both factors played a role. This controversy foreshadowed later criticisms of LEGO's partnership with Shell Oil, showing the company has repeatedly struggled with environmental issues in their product lines and corporate relationships. The Mindstorm's NXT hacking problem. They included sophisticated programming capabilities and sensors that made the sets popular with adult robotics enthusiasts and engineering students, but the company quickly discovered their robots could be hacked and reprogrammed for unintended purposes. Several high-profile incidents involved people programming Mindstorm's robots to pick locks, crack safes, or even aim and fire projectile weapons, with videos of these hacks going viral and causing serious concern among law enforcement. LEGO found themselves in the awkward position of having created an affordable robotics platform that could potentially be used for burglary or worse, though they argued that any tool can be misused and they couldn't be held responsible for user choices. The company considered adding restrictions to the programming software to prevent certain types of movements or behaviors, but they faced immediate backlash from the maker community, who argued this would cripple the educational value of the platform. Law enforcement agencies in several countries investigated whether Mindstorm's robots had been used in actual crimes, though no confirmed cases emerged beyond the viral demonstration videos. LEGO ultimately decided against restricting the software, but added prominent warnings about responsible use, and even hired some of the hackers who had demonstrated security vulnerabilities to help improve their systems. The controversy highlighted the dual-use problem with advanced consumer technology, where educational tools can potentially be weaponized or used for illegal purposes regardless of manufacturer intent. The controversy died down after a few years, but resurfaces occasionally whenever someone posts a new video of a Lego robot doing something questionable. The Exoforce anime appropriation concerns. Lego's Exoforce theme launched in 2006 as a clear attempt to capitalize on the popularity of Japanese mecha anime, with giant robots, anime-styled minifigure faces, and storylines heavily borrowed from shows like Gundam. Japanese Lego fans and anime enthusiasts criticized the theme as cultural appropriation, arguing that Lego had simply copied the aesthetic and storytelling conventions of anime, without understanding or respecting the cultural context that created those conventions. The sets sold poorly in Japan itself, with many potential customers viewing them as cheap knockoffs rather than authentic representations of mecha culture. Lego had partnered with Japanese designers for some aspects of the theme, but critics argued this was tokenism rather than genuine cultural collaboration. The theme lasted only 3 years before cancellation, with Lego citing weak sales outside the Asian market, though the cultural appropriation concerns likely contributed to the brand damage in the very demographic they were trying to attract. Some Western collectors loved Exoforce precisely because it brought anime aesthetics to Lego, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned with the cultural sensitivity issues. The controversy was an early example of how globalized media has made cultural borrowing in toys more complicated, as companies can no longer assume they can simply copy popular styles from other cultures without pushback. Lego hasn't attempted another explicitly anime-inspired original theme since, though their Ninjago line incorporates some anime elements in a more careful and culturally consultative way. The Technic motorcycle accident concerns. Several Lego Technic motorcycle sets from the early 2000s featured realistic models with working suspension and steering, but parent safety advocates raised concerns that these sets glorified motorcycles to children, without including any safety messaging about helmets or responsible riding. The criticism intensified after a few high-profile motorcycle accidents involving teenagers, with grieving parents pointing to toys like the Lego Technic bikes as part of a broader cultural problem that made dangerous vehicles seem cool without acknowledging the risks. Lego added small helmet accessories to rider minifigures in subsequent sets, but critics argued this was insufficient and that the sets should include explicit safety information or warnings about real motorcycle dangers. Some retailers briefly pulled the motorcycle sets from shelves during the height of the controversy, though most restocked them once media attention moved on. The entire episode reflected broader societal debates about whether toy manufacturers have responsibility for safety messaging or whether parents should handle those conversations independently. Lego's official position was that their toys represent fantasy play and shouldn't be expected to deliver real-world safety lessons, but they did quietly adjust their designs to show riders with more protective gear. Modern Technic motorcycle sets universally include helmets and often feature sport bike fairings rather than the chopper-style bikes that sparked the original controversy. The incident was relatively minor compared to other controversies on this list, but it demonstrated how Lego constantly navigates expectations that they serve as educators and moral guides rather than just toy manufacturers. The Castle Crusader controversy. Lego's castle theme has gone through numerous iterations since the 1980s, but the 2010 Kingdoms sub-theme sparked controversy for its use of Crusader imagery, including red crosses on white backgrounds, and knight characters clearly modelled on historical crusaders. Muslim advocacy groups objected to the sets, arguing that Crusader imagery remains painful for Islamic communities given the historical atrocities committed during the actual Crusades and the way modern extremists invoke Crusader symbolism. Lego insisted the sets were generic medieval fantasy with no connection to real crusades, but historians pointed out the Red Cross shield design was specifically and uniquely associated with crusaders rather than generic knights. The controversy was particularly sensitive coming just a few years after September 11th, when tensions between Western and Islamic communities remained high and Crusader rhetoric had been unfortunately invoked by some political figures. Lego made subtle changes to later castle sets, removing the explicit Crusader cross imagery and opting for more generic coat of arms designs that didn't carry the same historical baggage. The company has been much more careful about medieval military themes since, consulting with historians to ensure their fantasy knights don't inadvertently reference real historical conflicts that remain sensitive. Some collectors and LEGO fans dismiss the controversy as political correctness gone too far, arguing that Crusader Knights are a standard part of medieval play scenarios, but the company's swift response suggested they took the concerns seriously. The incident is taught in some marketing courses as an example of how historical imagery that seems neutral in one cultural context can be deeply offensive in another. The Friends Olivia disabled representation failure. When LEGO launched the Friends theme in 2012 to appeal to girls, they initially included no characters with disabilities, drawing criticism from disability rights advocates who noted that roughly 15% of the global population has some form of disability, yet LEGO's idealized Heart Lake City contained none. The company promised to do better, and in 2016 released a set featuring a character in a wheelchair, but the execution was heavily criticized because the wheelchair was obviously an afterthought that didn't actually fit properly in most of the set's buildings or vehicles. Disability advocates pointed out that true accessibility means designing environments where wheelchairs work seamlessly, not just adding a wheelchair accessory to an inaccessible world. The Olivia mini doll, using the wheelchair, was also shown standing up in some promotional materials, which confused messaging about permanent versus temporary disabilities. LEGO went back to the drawing board and consulted with disability organizations to create better integrated wheelchair-accessible designs in future sets, but the initial failure was embarrassing for a company that prides itself on inclusive play. The controversy highlighted how representation isn't just about including diverse characters, but ensuring those characters can meaningfully interact with the play environment. Modern Friends sets include ramps, wider doorways, and other accessibility features as standard design elements rather than special additions. The incident became a case study in how well-intentioned diversity efforts can backfire if companies don't consult with the communities they're trying to represent. The Speed Champions advertising rules violation. LEGO Speed Champions line features licensed vehicles from real automakers including Ferrari, Porsche and Bugatti, but the sets ran afoul of European advertising regulations that limit how brands can market to children. Several countries' consumer protection agencies investigated whether the sets constituted automobile advertising to minors, which is heavily restricted or banned in some jurisdictions due to concerns about brand loyalty formation before children can legally drive or purchase vehicles. LEGO argued the sets are about building and play rather than automobile advertising, but regulators noted the prominent display of brand logos and the way the sets encourage children to express preferences for specific luxury car brands. Some stores in Germany and Scandinavia briefly pulled Speed Champions sets from shelves, while lawyers debated whether they violated advertising to children laws. The controversy revealed a grey area in advertising law where licensed products aimed at children occupy an uncertain legal status between toy and advertisement. LEGO ultimately prevailed in most jurisdictions by demonstrating that the set's primary purpose was creative building rather than brand promotion, but they did reduce the prominence of automaker logos in some markets. The incident cost LEGO significant legal fees and threatened an entire product line that had become very popular with both children and adult collectors. Critics of advertising to children laws pointed to the controversy as an example of regulatory overreach, while child development experts argued the concerns were legitimate given how licensed toys create brand preferences that persist into adulthood. The controversy has died down, but occasionally resurfaces when new Speed Champions sets are released, featuring particularly expensive or luxury vehicles. The Ninjago cultural mashup criticism. LEGO's Ninjago theme has been one of their most successful original properties since its 2011 launch, but it has faced persistent criticism for blending together multiple Asian cultures without distinction or accuracy. The theme mixes Japanese ninja mythology, Chinese architecture and dragons, Southeast Asian costume elements, and generic Oriental aesthetics into a fantasy world that some Asian critics argue perpetuates the Western tendency to treat all Asian cultures as interchangeable. Specific design elements like character names, building styles, and weapon choices often combine Japanese and Chinese references in ways that would never occur in actual Asian cultures. creating what critics call a pan-Asian theme park version of Eastern traditions. LEGO has defended Ninjago as explicit fantasy that isn't meant to represent any real culture. But critics respond that children absorb messages about Asian cultures from the theme, regardless of intent. The company did hire Asian cultural consultants for later Ninjago seasons and sets, making the representations somewhat more nuanced and specific, but the core premise still involves cultural blending that makes some Asian fans uncomfortable. The controversy is complicated by the fact that many Asian LEGO fans love Ninjago and don't see the cultural mashup as problematic, viewing it as creative fusion rather than disrespectful mixing. Western fans often dismiss the criticism entirely, not understanding why combining different Asian elements would be any different from how fantasy genres routinely combine European cultural references. The debate touches on larger questions about cultural authenticity in children's media, and whether Western companies can create Asian-inspired content without engaging in Orientalism. Ninjago remains hugely popular and profitable, despite the controversy, suggesting that cultural sensitivity concerns don't always translate to market consequences. The minifigure skin tone debate. For decades, LEGO used yellow skin for minifigures to represent a universal, non-racial everyman that could be anyone regardless of ethnicity, but this approach came under fire as society became more attuned to representation issues. Critics argued that yellow as neutral actually defaulted to a white-coded character, as the facial features, hairstyles, and associated storylines of yellow minifigures overwhelmingly reflected European and American cultural norms. When LEGO introduced licensed themes like Star Wars and NBA that required realistic skin tones, they struggled with how many shades to offer and how to depict ethnic features without stereotyping. The company has been criticized both for moving away from universal yellow minifigures and for sticking with them, putting them in an impossible position where any choice regarding racial representation offends someone. Some collectors insist yellow minifigures were perfect, and LEGO should have never introduced realistic skin tones, while others argue realistic tones were necessary for proper representation. LEGO now uses realistic skin tones for licensed properties and continues yellow for most original themes, which critics say sends a confusing message about which characters are real versus universal. The company has added more diverse hairstyles and facial features across all skin tones, but some advocates argue they need to go further in representing global diversity. The controversy reflects how a toy company's 50-year-old design decision has become entangled with modern identity politics in ways the original designers could never have anticipated. There's no easy solution that satisfies everyone, and LEGO continues to face criticism regardless of what approach they take to minifigure skin tones. The Prince of Persia Orientalism accusations. When LEGO released sets based on the 2010 Prince of Persia movie, critics immediately attacked both the film and toys for perpetuating Orientalist stereotypes about Middle Eastern cultures as exotic, mysterious, and vaguely threatening. The sets featured exaggerated architecture with excessive domes and minarets, character designs that mixed multiple Middle Eastern cultures inaccurately, and storylines centered on white protagonists saving brown-skinned populations. Middle Eastern LEGO fans expressed frustration that one of the few major Western toy themes representing their region relied on fantasy clichés rather than authentic cultural elements. LEGO's response that they were adapting a movie rather than creating original content didn't satisfy critics, who argued the company had a choice whether to license problematic properties. The set sold poorly and the Prince of Persia movie was a box office disappointment, leading some to argue that audiences have tired of Orientalist narratives, even when packaged as adventure entertainment. The theme was quickly discontinued, though whether due to poor sales or the controversy remains unclear. Modern toy executives cite Prince of Persia as an example of how licensing trendy movies doesn't guarantee success, and can actually damage brand reputation if the source material is culturally problematic. The controversy was relatively muted compared to others on this list, possibly because the theme disappeared so quickly that criticism never built significant momentum. Some collectors specifically seek out Prince of Persia sets as examples of LEGO's missteps in cultural representation, though others simply view them as interesting artifacts of an unsuccessful movie franchise. The Ultra Agents Surveillance State Concerns. LEGO's Ultra Agents theme from 2014 featured high-tech agents fighting supervillains with extensive surveillance technology, including drones, cameras, and computer systems for monitoring citizens. The theme launched just as public awareness of government surveillance programs was peaking, following Edward Snowden's revelations, making the timing particularly problematic. Privacy advocates criticized the sets for normalizing surveillance culture and teaching children that constant monitoring was heroic and necessary rather than a civil liberties threat. The sets included sophisticated tracking technology and computer systems that the heroic agents used to spy on the population in search of villains, which critics noted mirrored controversial real-world government programs. LEGO hadn't intended any political commentary and was simply creating a sci-fi cop theme, but the cultural context made the sets read as tacit endorsement of surveillance states. The controversy was mostly limited to privacy advocate circles and didn't generate mainstream media attention, possibly because the theme was relatively small and short-lived. Ultra Agents was discontinued after just 2 years, with LEGO citing weak sales, though the surveillance criticism likely didn't help. Modern LEGO themes are more careful about how they depict law enforcement and monitoring technology, generally keeping such elements more fantasy-based rather than resembling real surveillance systems. The incident demonstrated how political and social context can transform innocent toy themes into controversial statements, regardless of manufacturer intent. The Shell Partnership Environmental Backlash. LEGO's 50-year partnership with Shell Oil to produce co-branded sets sold at gas stations became a major controversy in 2014 when Greenpeace launched a campaign attacking the relationship. Environmental activists argued that LEGO was helping Shell build positive brand associations with children, effectively recruiting the next generation of oil company customers and creating emotional connections that would make people less critical of fossil fuel companies. Greenpeace created a viral video showing a LEGO Arctic scene slowly being covered in oil, set to a sad piano version of Everything is Awesome, which was viewed millions of times and generated enormous negative publicity for LEGO. The campaign pointed out that Shell was preparing to drill in the Arctic, an environmentally risky project, and argued LEGO was helping polish Shell's image while the oil company pursued destructive policies. LEGO initially defended the partnership as a simple business relationship that helped make their products more accessible by distributing them at gas stations, but public pressure mounted as parents began questioning whether they wanted their children playing with Shell-branded sets. The company eventually announced they would not renew the partnership when it expired, a massive victory for environmental activists and a significant financial loss for LEGO. The controversy forced LEGO to think more carefully about corporate partnerships and how they aligned with the company's stated environmental values. Critics pointed out the hypocrisy of LEGO pledging to use sustainable materials while simultaneously promoting oil companies, and the company has since made more careful choices about brand partnerships. The incident is studied in business ethics courses as an example of how stakeholder pressure can force companies to abandon profitable relationships that conflict with their public values. The Lone Ranger controversies. LEGO's 2013 Lone Ranger sets faced multiple controversies even before release, starting with the problematic nature of the Lone Ranger character himself, who has been criticized for decades as a white savior narrative with its portrayal of Tonto, a Native American character. Indigenous advocates objected to the sets, arguing that the Lone Ranger mythos perpetuates harmful stereotypes about Native Americans as sidekicks and mystical helpers to white heroes. The set's portrayal of Western expansion as heroic adventure also glossed over the genocide and displacement of native peoples that the historical period actually involved. Critics noted that LEGO seemed to have learned nothing from the earlier Fort Legoredo controversy, once again creating sets that treated colonization as fun play scenarios. The sets sold terribly, partly due to the movie's failure at the box office, but also because parents and collectors had become more aware of the racial problems with Western genre entertainment. LEGO retired the entire theme after just a year, marking one of their fastest abandonments of a licensed property. The company hasn't touched Western themes since, suggesting the commercial and reputational failure had a lasting impact. Modern LEGO executives privately acknowledge that the Lone Ranger represented poor judgment in property selection, though they've never made a public statement about the cultural sensitivity issues. Some collectors view the failed theme as an interesting historical footnote, while others believe the sets should be forgotten as an embarrassment. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles torture set, LEGO's 2013 TMNT set called Turtle Lair Attack, included a torture rack among the play features, where the villain Shredder could strap captured turtles and presumably torture them as part of the play scenario. Parent groups immediately objected to a children's toy that included torture as an acceptable play pattern, arguing it normalized violence and cruelty in ways that other combat-themed sets didn't. Child psychologists weighed in, noting that torture is categorically different from fantasy combat because it involves deliberate infliction of suffering on helpless victims rather than fighting between equals. LEGO defended the element as being true to the source material and consistent with villain lairs throughout their various themes, but they quietly removed the explicit torture rack from subsequent TMNT sets. The controversy was relatively brief but intense, with several major news outlets running stories questioning LEGO's judgment in including such an element. Critics pointed out that other villain layers included prisons, but not actual torture devices. The set remains available and popular among collectors, who either didn't know about the controversy or don't view it as problematic, but it frequently appears in discussions about inappropriate elements in LEGO sets. LEGO's official statements avoided the word torture and instead referred to the element as a trap, but the design clearly depicted a rack-style torture device rather than a simple cage or prison. The incident led to more careful review of play features in villain-themed sets to ensure they didn't cross lines regarding depictions of cruelty. The controversy resurfaces periodically when the sets appear in second-hand markets or when new LEGO fans discover the old news stories. The Friends' early marketing failure. The launch of LEGO Friends in 2012 became one of the company's most controversial moments when early marketing materials and the product line itself were attacked for reinforcing gender stereotypes. The sets focused heavily on beauty salons, cupcake cafes, and shopping scenarios rather than adventure or building challenges, sending a message that girls were interested in appearance and consumer activities rather than creativity and exploration. The new mini-doll figures were curvier and more conventionally feminine than classic minifigures, which critics argued taught girls their bodies should be decorative. Early advertisements showed girls playing passively with the sets in calm, domestic settings, while boys' sets were marketed with action and adventure, creating a stark and problematic contrast. A petition demanding LEGO abandon Friends gathered over 50,000 signatures, and prominent feminist writers penned op-eds attacking the company for setting back progress on gender-neutral toys. LEGO defended Friends by pointing to market research showing many girls felt excluded by traditional LEGO themes. But critics argued this was a self-fulfilling prophecy created by gendered marketing rather than innate preferences. The controversy was enormous, generating mainstream media coverage and threatening LEGO's progressive reputation. The company eventually adjusted Friends to include more diverse scenarios, including science labs, veterinary clinics, and adventure settings. Though the theme still skews traditionally feminine, modern Friends sets are much better received, but the launch controversy damaged LEGO's reputation with progressive parents for years. The incident is widely studied in marketing courses as an example of how gender-based product segmentation can backfire spectacularly even when backed by extensive research. The DC Universe superhero stripper scene. In 2012, LEGO released a DC Universe set featuring the Joker's ice cream truck, which seemed innocent until customers noticed that the set included a scene of what appeared to be a stripper pole with a female minifigure positioned on it. The element was described in instructions as a lamppost, but the minifigure's positioning and the overall design made it clear this was intentional adult humor slipped into a children's toy. Parent groups were outraged that LEGO would include sex work imagery in a set marketed to children, and conservative family organizations threatened boycotts. LEGO claimed the resemblance was unintentional and that the element was simply meant to be part of the Joker's chaotic circus aesthetic, but the design was too specific for most people to believe this explanation. The company didn't recall the set, but did remove the specific build from future production runs of the Joker-themed sets. The controversy was covered by mainstream media, with many articles featuring close-up photos of the questionable element, giving it far more attention than LEGO wanted. Some collectors found the incident hilarious, and the original sets became more valuable because of the controversy, with sealed boxes commanding premium prices. Critics argued it showed LEGO designers were including inappropriate adult jokes that children wouldn't understand, but that made parents uncomfortable once they noticed. The incident led to stricter review processes for licensed superhero sets to ensure designers weren't sneaking in adult content as Easter eggs for older fans. LEGO has never publicly discussed whether any employees were disciplined over the design, but internal policies on inappropriate content were reportedly tightened. The Simpsons House alcohol controversy. When LEGO released the Simpsons House set in 2014, many were surprised the notoriously family-friendly company would partner with an adult animated show. But the set became controversial specifically because it included Duff beer cans and a home bar. Anti-alcohol advocacy groups objected to a children's toy that normalized alcohol consumption and specifically depicted beer brand logos, arguing it constituted alcohol advertising to minors. The set was pulled from shelves in some countries with strict alcohol advertising laws, and several toy retailers refused to stock it due to concerns about the alcohol elements. LEGO defended the set by noting The Simpsons was clearly an adult property and the set was marketed to collectors rather than children, but critics pointed out that LEGO is primarily a children's brand regardless of specific product marketing. The controversy highlighted the tension inherent in LEGO licensing adult properties while maintaining their reputation as a children's toy manufacturer. Some parent groups argued that any LEGO set would inevitably end up in children's hands, regardless of intended audience, making alcohol depictions inappropriate. The Simpsons House set remained available in most markets and sold very well, suggesting the controversy had limited commercial impact. LEGO has since been more careful about alcohol depictions in sets, generally avoiding brand names and minimizing visibility of alcoholic beverages, even in adult-targeted products. The incident demonstrated how LEGO's expansion into adult collector markets creates new challenges regarding age-appropriate content that the company continues to navigate. The Monster Fighters occult accusations. LEGO's Monster Fighters theme from 2012 featured heroes fighting vampires, zombies, mummies, and other classic movie monsters, but religious groups attacked the sets for promoting occult themes and dark spirituality to children. Some Christian organizations argued the sets normalized engagement with demonic entities and the undead, which their theology considers spiritually dangerous. The controversy was particularly intense in the United States, where similar accusations had been leveled at Dungeons & Dragons and Harry Potter, with concerned parents seeing Monster Fighters as another example of toys that open children to dark spiritual influences. LEGO responded that the monsters were based on classic Universal Horror Continue 1048 films and Halloween traditions rather than any genuine occult practices, and that the heroic characters were defeating the monsters rather than celebrating them. Critics remained unsatisfied, pointing out that children playing with the sets would inevitably spend time role-playing as the monster characters, which they considered harmful regardless of the set's intended narrative. The theme was discontinued after 2 years, with LEGO citing weak sales, though the religious backlash may have been a contributing factor. Modern LEGO themes still include monsters and undead characters, suggesting the company didn't internalize the criticism, or perhaps that society has become less concerned with such content. The controversy seems quaint in retrospect, given how mainstream supernatural content has become in children's entertainment, but it represented real concern among certain parent communities at the time. Some collectors specifically seek Monster Fighter sets as artifacts of LEGO's brief foray into horror-adjacent themes. The Chima furry community concerns. LEGO's Legends of Chima theme, featuring anthropomorphic animals in a fantasy conflict setting, unexpectedly became popular within furry fandom communities, leading to concerns about adults with specific interests engaging with what was meant to be a children's property. The theme's character designs with humanoid animals in armor inadvertently hit several design notes popular in furry subculture, and online communities began creating content around the characters that ranged from innocent fan art to adult-oriented material. LEGO became aware that significant amounts of adult fan content were being created around Kima characters, some of it sexual in nature, which created discomfort for a company that positions itself as child-focused. The situation was delicate because LEGO generally encourages fan communities and user-generated content, but adult sexual content based on their characters obviously crossed lines. The company couldn't directly address the issue without drawing more attention to it, so they instead quietly stopped promoting Chima and discontinued the theme earlier than originally planned. The controversy was mostly contained to online discussions rather than mainstream media, but it represented a new challenge in the age of internet fan communities, where content intended for children can be reappropriated by adults in ways companies can't control. Chima sets became somewhat awkward in collector communities, with some fans uncomfortable displaying them due to associations with adult furry content. LEGO has been more careful about anthropomorphic character design since, avoiding combinations of features that might have unintended appeal to adult communities with specific interests. The entire situation highlighted how internet culture has made it impossible for companies to fully control how their characters and properties are used or interpreted. Modern LEGO sets with animal characters tend to be more clearly stylized toward either very young children or clearly differentiated from humanoid body types to avoid similar associations. The Pirates of Barracuda Bay Alcohol. The 2020 Pirates of Barracuda Bay set, released as a nostalgic tribute to LEGO's classic pirate themes, included a detailed beach bar scene complete with a rum barrel and various bottles that clearly depicted alcohol. The set targeted adult collectors through the LEGO Ideas platform, but critics noted it was still being sold in toy aisles alongside children's products, creating the same concerns as The Simpsons house about alcohol imagery. The rum barrel was prominently featured as a central play element, with the pirate characters positioned around it in ways that suggested drinking was a core part of the pirate experience being celebrated. Parent organizations that had previously criticized LEGO for alcohol content in sets were disappointed the company hadn't learned from earlier controversies and was continuing to include such elements. LEGO's defense rested on the argument that the set was explicitly marketed to adults through the 18+ branding, but the practical reality was that children would inevitably see and want the set regardless of target demographic. Some countries' advertising standards required LEGO to remove alcohol references from promotional materials, even though the set itself retained those elements. The controversy was muted compared to earlier alcohol-related issues, possibly because society has become somewhat more accepting of LEGO's adult collector focus. The set sold extremely well and remains popular among collectors who view the alcohol elements as authentic pirate atmosphere rather than problematic content. LEGO continues to walk a fine line between creating realistic, adult-oriented sets and maintaining their reputation as a children's brand. The Hidden Side augmented reality privacy concerns. LEGO's Hidden Side theme launched in 2019 with an innovative augmented reality app that allowed children to point phone cameras at physical sets to unlock digital play features. But privacy advocates immediately raised concerns about data collection and surveillance. The app required extensive permissions, including camera access, location tracking, and internet connectivity, leading to questions about what data LEGO was collecting from children using the app. European GDPR regulations and American COPPA laws strictly limit data collection from minors, and LEGO faced scrutiny over whether their app complied with these protections. Privacy researchers discovered that the app communicated with multiple servers and contained analytics code that tracked user behavior in detail, though LEGO maintained all data collection was anonymous and compliant with regulations. Parent groups questioned why a children's toy needed location tracking and persistent internet connections, suggesting LEGO prioritized data collection for marketing purposes over privacy protection. The controversy never reached the mainstream media, but circulated widely in privacy-focused communities and tech policy circles. LEGO updated the app to reduce data collection and clarified their privacy policies, but some advocates continued to recommend parents not allow children to use the app. The Hidden Side theme was discontinued in 2020 after poor sales. with some attributing the failure partly to privacy-conscious parents avoiding the app-dependent sets. The incident foreshadowed growing concerns about smart toys and internet-connected play that collect data from children, an issue that extends far beyond LEGO. Modern LEGO apps include more prominent privacy disclosures and parental controls, suggesting the company learned from the hidden side criticism. The controversy highlighted the tension between innovative digital physical play experiences and legitimate privacy concerns in an era of pervasive data collection. The Slave Eye name change outrage. In 2021, LEGO quietly changed the name of Boba Fett's ship from Slave Eye to Boba Fett's Starship on set boxes and promotional materials, sparking intense backlash from Star Wars fans who viewed this as political correctness erasing established canon. The change was made in coordination with Lucasfilm and Disney as part of a broader effort to avoid words related to slavery in Star Wars branding, particularly for children's products. Critics argued that the ship name was established law with no connection to chattel slavery, and that changing it represented corporate sanitization of art for controversial reasons. Some fans organized boycotts of the renamed set and created online petitions demanding LEGO restore the original name. The controversy became a flashpoint in broader culture war debates about historical sensitivity versus preservation of fictional universes. LEGO maintained they were simply following Disney's branding guidelines for the Star Wars license and had no independent choice in the matter. Conservative media outlets seized on the story as an example of woke corporations bowing to pressure and erasing history, while progressive voices argued the change was sensible given the history of slavery and its continued trauma for many communities. The renamed set sold normally despite the controversy, suggesting most consumers either didn't notice or didn't care about the name change. The incident demonstrated how LEGO has become a battlefield in broader cultural conflicts, with their design choices scrutinized for political implications regardless of intent. The company has since been more cautious about changes to established properties, anticipating fan reaction to any alterations to beloved characters or elements. The Art World Trade Center. In 2021, LEGO released the Art World Map set with 11,695 pieces designed to be hung on walls as artwork, but customers quickly noticed the map omitted Taiwan as a separate entity, instead showing it as part of China. The omission sparked intense controversy, given ongoing geopolitical tensions over Taiwan's status and accusations that LEGO was kowtowing to Chinese government censorship to protect market access. Human rights organizations noted that Western companies increasingly self-censor to avoid offending Chinese authorities, and LEGO's map was cited as a particularly egregious example since maps are inherently political statements. The company claimed the map showed internationally recognized borders and they had no political intent, but critics pointed out that many countries and institutions do recognize Taiwan separately, and LEGO had made a choice to align with China's preferred cartography. Several retailers in Taiwan refused to stock LEGO products in protest, and democratic activists called for boycotts. The controversy was covered extensively in international relations and business media as an example of how Chinese market power influences Western corporate behavior, even in products sold outside China. LEGO didn't change the map design, but did release a statement emphasizing they respect all people regardless of geography. A weak response that satisfied no one. The incident damaged LEGO's reputation in Taiwan, and among pro-democracy advocates who now view the company as complicit in Chinese political pressure, modern corporations face impossible choices between access to the Chinese market and maintaining values like free expression and national self-determination. LEGO's map decision will be studied for years as an example of how consumer products become entangled in international politics. The Forestman reboot. Logging criticism. When LEGO released new castle sets in 2021 that included updated versions of the classic Forestman faction, environmental groups noticed that some of the sets depicted logging activities and timber harvesting as neutral or positive activities. The criticism was particularly pointed given LEGO's public commitments to sustainability and reducing plastic use, making their depiction of logging seem hypocritical. Activists noted that deforestation is one of the leading causes of climate change and biodiversity loss, and children's toys, showing tree cutting as adventure fun, sent the wrong message. LEGO responded that the sets showed sustainable forestry practices, and that medieval timber harvesting was necessary for survival, not environmental destruction. Critics replied that children wouldn't understand such distinctions and would simply internalize that cutting down forests was an acceptable activity. The controversy never reached mainstream awareness, but circulated in environmental communities and led to some calls for boycotts. LEGO adjusted later castle sets to minimize logging elements and instead emphasized forest protection and interaction with nature. The incident showed how LEGO's environmental reputation makes them vulnerable to criticism about any product elements that could be seen as anti-environmental. Modern LEGO designs are much more conscious about depicting human relationships with nature in balanced ways. The Forestmen controversy was minor compared to others on this list, but it demonstrated the scrutiny LEGO faces regarding consistency between corporate values and product content. Some longtime fans dismissed the criticism as excessive, noting that medieval timber use was historically accurate and that fantasy play shouldn't require modern environmental politics. Continue 101, the Elves theme appropriation debate. LEGO's Elves theme, launched in 2015, featured a fantasy world with nature-based magic, elemental dragons, and mystical forests that drew heavily from Celtic and Nordic mythology, without acknowledgement or cultural consultation. The sets included runic symbols, Celtic knotwork patterns, and architectural elements directly borrowed from historical Viking and Irish designs, which some cultural heritage advocates argued constituted appropriation of sacred symbols. Indigenous European communities, particularly those working to preserve Celtic languages and traditions, expressed frustration that LEGO commodified their spiritual and cultural heritage into a generic fantasy aesthetic marketed to children worldwide. The controversy was more muted than complaints about Asian or Native American representation, partly because European cultures face less marginalization globally, but the concerns were philosophically similar. LEGO's position was that fantasy genres have always drawn on historical mythologies, and that elves represented creative synthesis rather than direct cultural representation. Critics pointed out that the company applied different standards to European versus non-European cultural borrowing, being more careful about Asian and African references while freely using Celtic and Nordic elements. The theme ran for 3 years before discontinuation, with LEGO citing shifting market preferences rather than cultural concerns. Some mythology scholars defended LEGO's use of these elements as falling within acceptable creative license, arguing that ancient European symbols have entered global public domain through centuries of cultural exchange. The debate highlighted inconsistencies in how cultural appropriation is discussed, with some cultures' symbols seen as fair game for commercial use, while others are protected. Modern LEGO fantasy themes are more generic and less tied to specific cultural traditions, possibly reflecting awareness of these sensitivities. The Elves controversy never generated mainstream media attention, but was extensively discussed in academic circles studying cultural representation in children's media. The Minecraft Creeper Suicide Bomber comparisons. LEGO's Minecraft sets became hugely popular after launching in 2012, but the inclusion of creeper characters sparked uncomfortable conversations about whether the self-destructing enemies resembled suicide bombers. The creeper's defining characteristic is approaching players and exploding, destroying both themselves and nearby structures, which some critics noted paralleled the mechanics of suicide bombing. Parent groups questioned whether children playing with exploding creepers were inadvertently role-playing terrorism tactics, particularly given the political context of the 2010s, when suicide bombings featured prominently in news coverage. LEGO and Minecraft's developers insisted creepers were abstract video game enemies with no real-world political referent, and that the comparison was being imposed by adults rather than recognized by children. Child psychologists were divided, with some arguing children clearly understood creepers as fantasy game elements, while others worried about normalization of self-destructive violence. The controversy remained mostly in online discussions rather than generating major media coverage, but it was persistent enough that both LEGO and Microsoft addressed it in various interviews. Some international markets were more sensitive to the issue, with retailers in Middle Eastern countries briefly hesitant to stock Minecraft sets due to cultural sensitivities around suicide attacks. The sets continued selling extraordinarily well globally, suggesting most consumers either disagreed with the comparison or didn't consider it problematic. Modern Minecraft sets still include creepers as central characters, indicating LEGO doesn't view the criticism as commercially significant. The entire debate demonstrated how violent game mechanics translated into physical toys can prompt uncomfortable questions about what children are actually playing with and learning. Some academic papers on toy violence have used the creeper controversy as a case study in how digital and physical play intersect. The Architecture White House set protest. LEGO's Architecture White House set, released in various versions over the years, became controversial during politically turbulent periods when some customers didn't want to display symbols of administrations they opposed. During both the Obama and Trump presidencies, some customers contacted LEGO demanding alternative versions of the set that didn't include presidential minifigures, or requesting the ability to buy sets without funding a company that might support opposing political views. The controversy highlighted how even historically neutral architectural sets can become politicized during divisive periods. LEGO maintained that the White House represents American democracy as an institution rather than any particular president or political party, but this distinction was lost on some politically passionate customers. Some retailers reported vandalism of White House set displays, with customers removing or defacing the included presidential minifigures in stores. The situation became particularly intense during the Trump administration, when some progressive LEGO fans organized campaigns asking the company to discontinue the set as a form of protest. LEGO refused, arguing that architectural landmarks should be preserved in their product line, regardless of contemporary political feelings. The controversy extended to other architecture sets representing government buildings, with some customers questioning whether LEGO should produce any political structures given polarization risks. Sales of the White House set actually increased during controversial periods, possibly because both supporters and opponents of various administrations wanted to own the representation. The incident demonstrated how apolitical products can become political symbols. LEGO continues producing government building sets, but has been more cautious about including political figures or symbols that could make the sets feel aligned with particular ideologies. The White House remains in the architecture line, though current versions minimize political elements in favor of focusing on architectural details. The Speed Champions McLaren Senna Death Exploitation. When LEGO released a Speed Champions set featuring the McLaren Senna supercar in 2019, some critics objected to the commercialization of a vehicle named after Ayrton Senna, a race car driver who died tragically in 1991. The criticism was that LEGO and McLaren were profiting from a dead athlete's name and legacy by turning it into a children's toy without considering the ethics of commercializing death. Senna's family had approved the McLaren vehicle name and supported the LEGO set, but some motorsport fans felt the toy was disrespectful to the driver's memory. The controversy was particularly sensitive in Brazil, where Senna is considered a national hero and where his death remains a source of collective trauma decades later. LEGO emphasized that the set celebrated Senna's achievements and McLaren's engineering rather than exploiting his death, and the proceeds supported the Senna Foundation's educational programs. Critics remained uncomfortable with the idea of children playing with a toy version of something named after a person who died violently, arguing it represented a form of death commodification common in modern capitalism. The set sold well internationally but received mixed reception in Brazil, where the controversy was most intense. Some retailers in South America added memorial information to the set displays to provide context about Senna's life and legacy. The incident raised broader questions about when memorializing deceased figures through consumer products becomes exploitative rather than honoring. LEGO has continued partnering with brands that use deceased athletes' names, suggesting they view this as acceptable with family permission. The controversy demonstrated how global product launches must navigate different cultural relationships with death and memorialization. Modern Speed Champion sets generally avoid vehicles named after deceased individuals, possibly reflecting quiet lessons learned from the Senna reception. The City Police defund movement backlash. LEGO's City Police sets came under scrutiny during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests and calls to defund police, with some activists arguing that police-themed toys normalized law enforcement to children and reinforced the idea that police presence was inherently positive. Progressive parent groups organized campaigns asking LEGO to discontinue police sets, or at least create alternative community safety scenarios, but didn't center armed officers. The criticism noted that LEGO police sets almost always portrayed officers as heroes stopping clearly marked criminals, never showing the complexity or problems with real-world policing. Some customers pointed out that LEGO police minifigures were predominantly white or yellow-skinned, rarely representing the diversity of communities being policed. LEGO responded that their city theme represented idealized community life, and that police sets showed aspirational public safety rather than commenting on real-world policing issues. The company committed to increasing diversity in police minifigures and showing more community service scenarios alongside crime fighting, but they refused to discontinue police sets entirely. Conservative groups attacked the criticism as radical politics infiltrating children's toys and rallied in support of LEGO police sets. Sales of police sets reportedly increased during the controversy, as some customers bought them specifically to counter what they viewed as excessive political correctness. The debate became a flashpoint in broader cultural battles over police legitimacy and children's socialization regarding authority figures. LEGO found itself attacked from both sides, with progressives saying they didn't go far enough in reforming police representation, and conservatives saying they shouldn't change anything at all. Modern LEGO City police sets include more diverse officers and community policing scenarios, suggesting the company tried to find a middle ground. The controversy continues simmering, with each new police set generating renewed debate about whether LEGO should produce them at all. The Harry Potter Goblet of Fire graveyard set death imagery. When LEGO released Harry Potter sets based on the Goblet of Fire in 2005, the graveyard scene where Voldemort returns featured tombstones, death imagery, and a play scenario centered on dark resurrection magic. Some religious groups objected to the set for depicting necromancy and making light of death in graves, which they viewed as spiritually dangerous content for children. The controversy was part of broader religious objections to Harry Potter's magical content, but the physical LEGO set made the concerns more tangible since children would be physically building and playing with a graveyard. Parent groups noted that the set encouraged children to recreate a scene involving murder and dark magic, which they argued went beyond typical fantasy combat into genuinely dark territory. LEGO defended the set as faithful to the source material and noted that Harry Potter was one of the most popular children's franchises globally, indicating widespread acceptance of its themes. The controversy was most intense in conservative American and Christian communities, with some schools banning students from bringing Harry Potter LEGO sets to class. Several religious toy retailers refused to stock any Harry Potter LEGO sets, particularly the graveyard scene. The sets sold extremely well despite the controversy, indicating it was limited to specific demographic segments rather than representing widespread concern. LEGO has continued producing Harry Potter sets with increasingly dark themes, suggesting the early controversy didn't significantly impact their approach. Modern Harry Potter sets include even more explicit death imagery, including Dementors and the Department of Mystery's Death Chamber, but generate less controversy, possibly because society has become more accepting of dark fantasy content. The graveyard set controversy is now viewed as a historical curiosity representing early 2000s moral panic around Harry Potter that has since subsided. Some collectors specifically seek the controversial sets as interesting artifacts of the cultural battles around children's fantasy media. The Ghostbusters Firehouse Headquarters contamination symbol. The 2016 Ghostbusters Firehouse Headquarters set included the containment unit, where ghosts were stored, featuring a warning symbol that some customers noted resembled radiation hazard symbols and biohazard markings. Parent safety advocates questioned whether LEGO should include symbols associated with genuine hazards in children's toys, arguing it could confuse children about real warning signs they might encounter. The criticism was that children playing with the set would see contamination symbols as fun, decorative elements rather than serious warnings, potentially reducing their effectiveness as actual safety communication. LEGO responded that the symbols were fantasy elements from the Ghostbusters universe and didn't precisely match real hazard symbols, so there was no actual confusion risk. Nuclear safety regulators in several countries reviewed the set and concluded the symbols were sufficiently different from official hazard markings to not constitute a safety concern. The controversy was minor and brief, but it highlighted the unexpected ways toys can intersect with public safety communication systems. Some educational experts argued that fantasy scenarios using modified hazard symbols might actually help children learn to recognize real warnings, though others maintained it created inappropriate associations. The set remained unchanged and continued selling well to adult collectors who were the primary target market. Modern LEGO sets continue using modified hazard symbols in science fiction contexts, suggesting the company doesn't view this as a meaningful problem. The incident was one of many examples where overly cautious safety advocates raise concerns that don't resonate with broader public or expert opinion. The Ghostbusters Firehouse has been re-released multiple times with the same contamination unit design, indicating LEGO considers the matter settled. The Pharaoh's Quest, treasure hunting colonialism. LEGO's Pharaoh's Quest theme from 2011 featured adventurers exploring Egyptian tombs to collect ancient treasures, fighting mummy guardians who tried to protect their rest. Critics immediately noted the theme recreated colonialist narratives about Western explorers having the right to plunder non-Western cultural heritage for profit and glory. The sets portrayed Egyptian dead and their burial sites as obstacles to overcome, rather than cultural heritage deserving respect and protection. Egyptologists and cultural heritage advocates pointed out that real-world tomb robbing remains a serious problem that damages archaeological sites and cultural understanding, and LEGO was essentially gamifying these destructive practices. The theme perpetuated Orientalist tropes about mysterious and dangerous Egypt, rather than representing the civilization with any accuracy or respect. LEGO maintained that Pharaoh's Quest was fantasy adventure, inspired by Indiana Jones, rather than commentary on real archaeology or colonialism. Critics responded that children wouldn't make that distinction and would absorb messages that taking artifacts from other cultures was exciting treasure hunting rather than theft. The theme was discontinued after 2 years, with unclear reasons, though the cultural criticism may have been a factor. Some museums that partnered with LEGO for educational programs refused to display Pharaoh's Quest sets due to concerns about the treasure hunting narrative. Modern LEGO sets touching on archaeology are more careful to frame exploration as discovery and preservation, rather than treasure extraction. The controversy was part of broader reckonings in popular media about adventure genre stories built on colonialist frameworks. Pharaoh's Quest sets are now somewhat controversial in collector communities, with some viewing them as problematic while others see them as innocent children's fantasy. The Disney Princess Ariel's underwater palace body image. The Little Mermaid sets in LEGO's Disney Princess line featured Ariel in mermaid form using the mini-doll body type that critics argued promoted unrealistic body standards to young girls. The mini-doll design has a narrower waist and more defined curves than standard minifigures, which body positivity advocates say reinforces the thin ideal and appearance focus. Ariel's character specifically has been criticized for its emphasis on physical beauty, and the narrative requiring her to change her body to find love, making the LEGO version part of broader concerns about Disney princess messaging. The sets focused heavily on beauty and palace aesthetics, rather than Ariel's curiosity and adventurousness, which critics argued reduced a complex character to appearance-focused play patterns. LEGO defended the mini-doll design as allowing more detailed and expressive characters that girls responded positively to in market research. Body image researchers noted that even slight differences in toy body proportions can influence children's perceptions of ideal bodies, making the mini-doll design potentially harmful. The controversy was part of broader debates about Disney princess toys and their impact on girls' development and self-image. Some retailers added body positivity messaging to displays of Disney princess sets, though this was grassroots effort rather than LEGO policy. The sets continue selling very well, indicating the body image concerns haven't significantly impacted commercial success. Modern Disney princess sets include more diverse body types and less appearance-focused play scenarios, suggesting LEGO has somewhat responded to criticism. The mini-doll design remains controversial, with divided opinion about whether it represents meaningful body idealization or acceptable toy design variation. Some parents specifically avoid Disney Princess Lego sets due to body image concerns, while others view the criticism as over-analysis of children's toys. Continue, no matter what 1104 the Creator Expert Bookshop Rainbow Flag controversy. When Lego released the Creator Expert Bookshop set in 2020, it included a small rainbow flag in the window, which the company intended as a subtle symbol of LGBTQ+ inclusion and diversity. Conservative religious groups immediately objected to the flag's presence, arguing that Lego was imposing sexual politics on children's toys and promoting lifestyles they religiously opposed. Some customers demanded refunds and organized boycotts, claiming Lego had betrayed family values by including LGBTQ+ symbolism in their products. The controversy intensified when LGBTQ+ advocates praised Lego for the inclusion, leading to a culture war battle over a tiny printed flag element in a set marketed primarily to adults. Lego stood by the design decision, releasing statements supporting diversity and inclusion as core company values. Conservative media outlets ran stories attacking Lego as another corporation captured by progressive ideology, while progressive outlets celebrated the company's stance. The bookshop set sold out rapidly, though whether due to the controversy or general popularity remains unclear. Some retailers in conservative regions removed the set from shelves or covered the rainbow flag in display models to avoid local backlash. The incident demonstrated how even minimal LGBTQ+ representation in products generates intense political reaction from opposing groups. Lego has continued including subtle pride symbols in various sets, indicating they view inclusion as more important than avoiding controversy with conservative customers. The bookshop controversy is studied in corporate social responsibility courses as an example of companies taking values-based stances that alienate some customers to align with others. Modern Lego sets include diverse family structures and relationships, continuing the trajectory begun with the rainbow flag inclusion. Some employees reported receiving harassment and threats related to the bookshop set, highlighting how corporate design decisions can have personal consequences for workers. The Dimensions Portal Electromagnetic Interference. Lego Dimensions, the Toys to Life video game platform, launched in 2015, included an electronic portal pad that read RFID chips embedded in minifigures and models placed on it. Some users reported that the portal interfered with other electronic devices, including pacemakers, hearing aids, and other medical equipment when operating. The RFID technology used electromagnetic signals that occasionally created interference patterns strong enough to disrupt sensitive electronics in close proximity. Medical device users contacted Lego with concerns that the toy portal could potentially cause health issues if used near implanted medical equipment. Lego investigated the reports and added warnings to packaging about keeping the portal away from medical devices, though they maintained the product met all safety standards. Consumer protection agencies in several countries reviewed the portal's electromagnetic emissions and required additional shielding in some cases. The controversy highlighted how interactive toys with wireless technology can create unexpected health and safety complications. Some disability advocates argued that Lego should have consulted with medical device users before launching the product to anticipate these issues. The Dimensions platform was discontinued in 2017, with poor sales being the primary reason, though the medical device interference certainly didn't help. Modern Lego-powered elements use different technologies that avoid the electromagnetic interference problems of the Dimensions portal. The incident led to stricter internal review processes for any Lego products with wireless or electronic components. Some customers who experienced medical device interference filed lawsuits against Lego, though most were settled quietly without admission of liability. The controversy was overshadowed by Dimensions' general commercial failure, but it remains a cautionary tale about thoroughly testing electronic toys for unintended consequences. The City Airport Security Theatre criticism. Lego City Airport sets have included security checkpoints with screening machines and security officer minifigures, which some critics argue teaches children to accept invasive surveillance and security theatre as normal aspects of travel. Privacy advocates note that airport security measures implemented after 2001 represent a massive expansion of state power over citizens' movements and bodies, and Lego sets normalize these practices to children. The sets portray security screening as a benign, necessary part of flying, rather than a controversial infringement on civil liberties that many adults object to. Child development experts debated whether exposing children to security checkpoint play scenarios helps them cope with real airport experiences, or whether it inappropriately socializes them to accept authority without question. LEGO maintained that airport sets simply reflect modern travel reality and help children understand and prepare for flying experiences. Critics responded that reflecting reality isn't neutral when that reality involves contentious political choices about security versus freedom. The controversy has been persistent but low level, never generating major media coverage but discussed extensively in privacy and civil liberties communities. Some parents specifically avoid airport sets because they don't want their children playing with security screening scenarios. Modern airport sets continue including security checkpoints, indicating LEGO doesn't view the criticism as commercially or ethically significant. The debate touches on broader questions about what level of political content is appropriate in children's toys and whether reflecting current society constitutes endorsement. Some privacy advocates have modified airport sets to remove security elements, sharing instructions online for creating freedom-respecting airport builds. The controversy demonstrates how even seemingly neutral infrastructure can be politically contentious when it reflects controversial policy choices. The Technic Liebherr Excavator Fossil Fuel Ties. The 2019 Technic Liebherr R900 excavator set was one of LEGO's largest and most complex, but environmental activists criticized it for glorifying machinery used primarily in destructive mining operations. The excavator model was based on equipment used to extract coal and other fossil fuels, leading to accusations that LEGO was promoting climate-damaging industries just as the climate crisis intensified. Critics noted the timing was particularly poor, given LEGO's public commitments to sustainability and finding alternatives to petroleum-based plastics in their own manufacturing. The set's marketing emphasized the excavator's size and power without mentioning environmental consequences of the mining operations such machines enable in reality. Environmental educators argued that children playing with the excavator would develop positive associations with extractive industries that needed to be phased out to address climate change. LEGO defended the set as a celebration of engineering and mechanical design rather than endorsement of any particular industry's practices. The company pointed out that excavators have many uses beyond fossil fuel mining, including construction and land management, though critics noted the specific Liebherr model was designed for mining applications. The controversy was amplified by the set's $450 price point, making it LEGO's premium offering in a year when climate activism reached new heights globally. Sales remained strong among Technic enthusiasts, who appreciated the mechanical complexity regardless of what the real equipment was used for. The incident highlighted tensions between LEGO's engineering-focused Technic line and their environmental corporate image. Modern Technic sets have been more careful to feature equipment with neutral or positive environmental associations, like recycling trucks and wind turbines. The excavator controversy is cited in sustainability reports as an example of how product choices can contradict corporate environmental messaging. The Harry Potter Gringotts Bank anti-Semitic imagery debate. LEGO's Harry Potter Diagon Alley set, released in 2018, included a detailed recreation of Gringotts Bank run by goblin characters, which some critics argued perpetuated anti-Semitic stereotypes about Jewish people and banking. The goblins in Harry Potter lore are depicted with hooked noses, obsession with gold, and control of the financial system, characteristics that mirror historical anti-Semitic caricatures. LEGO faced accusations of reproducing these problematic elements in physical form, making children literally build and play with structures and characters that echoed anti-Semitic propaganda. Defenders of the set argued that goblins are a standard fantasy creature, with characteristics established long before any anti-Semitic associations, and that reading such meanings into Harry Potter's world imposed interpretations not intended by the creators. Jewish groups were divided on the issue, with some calling for the set to be redesigned and others arguing the controversy was overblown or that the goblin imagery wasn't inherently anti-Semitic. LEGO stated they were faithfully recreating elements from the Harry Potter films and books without any intent to reference real-world ethnic stereotypes. The controversy intensified when actors from the films commented on anti-Semitism accusations, with some defending the goblin design and others acknowledging the problematic elements. The Diagon Alley set continued selling without changes, remaining one of LEGO's most popular and expensive Harry Potter offerings. Some retailers added informational materials about recognizing historical stereotypes, though this was grassroots initiative rather than official LEGO policy. The debate reflects ongoing discussions about whether fantasy creatures with certain characteristics inevitably carry real-world prejudice coding, regardless of intent. Modern analysis of children's media increasingly examines how fantasy races with negative characteristics can reinforce real-world racism and anti-Semitism even in fictional contexts. The controversy around Gringotts represents how licensed LEGO sets inherit and amplify any problematic elements from their source material. The Voltron Combinable Mecha Military Glorification. When LEGO released the massive Voltron set through their Ideas platform in 2018, some anti-militarism advocates criticized it for glorifying weaponized robots and military solutions to conflicts. The Voltron franchise centers on a giant robot formed by combining 5 Lion machines, which is then used to fight enemies through superior firepower and force. Critics argued that the set, particularly at its massive 2300p scale, taught children that military might and weapons were the primary solution to problems and conflicts. The transforming and combining features meant children would spend extensive time focusing on the robot's combat capabilities and weapon systems. Peace education advocates argued LEGO should promote conflict resolution and cooperation rather than giant fighting robots, even in fantasy contexts. LEGO defended the set as being based on a beloved nostalgic property that adult fans had requested through the Ideas platform democratic voting system. The company noted that Voltron's story actually involved diverse characters working together cooperatively, with the robot as a defensive last resort rather than aggressive weapon. Critics remained unconvinced, pointing out that regardless of narrative framing, the play pattern centered on building and using a massive combat machine. The controversy was relatively muted compared to others on this list, possibly because the set clearly targeted adult collectors rather than children. Some pacifist organizations added the Voltron set to their lists of toys to avoid, alongside more obvious military-themed products. Modern Ideas sets are evaluated partly on whether they promote positive values, though giant robots continue appearing regularly. The Voltron controversy demonstrated ongoing tensions between nostalgic adult collectors, who want their childhood franchises in LEGO form, and advocates who scrutinize all toys for the messages they send, regardless of target audience. The set remains highly valued among collectors and is considered one of the most impressive mechanical LEGO builds ever produced. The Stranger Things, the Upside Down set, horror appropriateness. LEGO's 2019 Stranger Things set, recreating the buyer's house that flips to reveal the Upside Down version, was controversial because it was based on a horror television show but sold alongside children's toys. Parent groups questioned why LEGO would license a property-rated TV, one that includes graphic violence, child endangerment scenarios, and horror elements clearly unsuitable for young children. The set's packaging included an 16+ age recommendation, but critics noted this was unenforceable, and LEGO products are inherently associated with children regardless of labeling. Some retailers placed the Stranger Things set in adult collector sections, but others stocked it with regular LEGO in toy aisles where young children would see and want it. The controversy highlighted growing questions about LEGO's expansion into adult markets and whether this compromised their identity as a children's brand. Child psychologists noted that LEGO's strong association with childhood meant sets based on adult properties would inevitably end up in children's hands through gifts from uninformed relatives or older siblings sharing collections. LEGO maintained that clearly marked adult sets allowed them to serve collector markets without impacting their children's products, but critics argued the brand itself carried implications that no age label could override. The Stranger Things set sold extremely well despite the controversy, particularly among adult fans of the show. Some family advocacy organizations called for LEGO to create a completely separate brand for adult products to avoid confusion with children's toys. Modern LEGO continues expanding adult offerings, including sets based on R-rated properties, indicating they don't view age appropriateness concerns as commercially limiting. The controversy resurfaces periodically when LEGO announces new licenses for mature content properties. The Stranger Things set is now retired and commands premium prices in secondary markets, suggesting collector enthusiasm outweighed any controversy-driven sales impact.